President Paul Kagame, in very difficult circumstances, has managed to create an environment that has facilitated the conduct of societal affairs in a very disciplined way. Great leaders like him must do in good time is now to think transition.
Yes.
Because transition is critical, and I want to believe that that is work in progress. How do you then create an environment where there are young men and women who will then carry the agenda forward?
Africa is a new hero, at least according to TikTok, WhatsApp groups, and Instagram. The name of that hero, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. Do you see echoes of another great African, Thomas Sankara, in him, in his rhetoric and posture? Or, as some would say, many believe, he's simply a manifestation of Russian propaganda and disinformation, who's there to almost lull Africa's youth into a false sense of hope? What are your thoughts?
I think Captain Traoré is a symbol of something. In 1984, I had the fortune of being an intern in the office of Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. And I was amazed at his simplicity. We were driving with him in his car in the streets of Dar es Salaam, and he was following rules. There was only one lead car and his car in the middle and another one at the back, but following the rules. With the advent of foreign law, we lost the good things of our culture. We only go to culture when it is convenient to do so. When we are wedding, then we say culture. But when we are stealing, we are not talking about culture. Colonialism is alive and well. We always talk about colonialism as if it was something that is in the past. It is alive. It is alive because the colonial boundaries that were imposed on us in Berlin in 1884 and 1885 are alive and well.
We are in Nairobi. I'm Sunny Nayombia, host of the Long Form Podcast. My team and I are in East Africa's richest city to speak directly to the people who make the city tick. Welcome to the Nairobi Conversations, a meeting place for African conversations led by African voices.
This is the very, very best. I introduce the very, very next. Big deal, you know this is the big league. Sanga mumi handa ya chigari make a big fish. Word on the street turakaze. Habari gani mumeze mte. Yute shimi mana kuva honda muchiye. If you want the long form, come close mrabure.
Wait, what? The long form.
What did he say?
The long form.
What?
The long form.
The long form. The long form.
Hello there. Greetings once again from Nairobi. My guest this week on the Long Form Podcast is Professor P.L.O. Lumumba. Professor Lumumba is one of Africa's most forceful voices on justice, leadership, and Pan-Africanism. Known for his electrifying speeches and unflinching critique of Africa's leadership class, Professor Lumumba joins me to discuss Rwanda's Paul Kagame, Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traoré, the DRC, Donald Trump, and the likelihood of seeing a united Africa in our lifetime. This is a conversation about Africa's place in the world, power, and narrative. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to make a deal with you. About 69.5% of you who watched this very podcast haven't hit the subscribe button yet. So, here's the deal I want to make with you. If you hit that subscribe button today, I promise you that my team and I will keep making the show
better and better in every single way. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button today. And now, let's get into the show.
Professor P.L.O. Lumumba, welcome to the Long Form Podcast.
Thank you.
It's an absolute honor to speak to an African giant.
Thank you.
Nairobi has been very good to me. I've spoken to someone I also admired, Charles Onyangobo.
Oh, Charles is here. I haven't
Yes,
seen
yes.
Charles in a long time.
No, I was
But
able
I
to.
read him every other
No,
week.
he's brilliant. And
Yes.
I really enjoyed my conversation with
Thank
him.
you.
And now I'm sure my listeners will enjoy that conversation, but they'll probably enjoy yours even more. I would like to ask you a question before we go into the nitty-gritty. People are very fascinated about you. When I told my young sister that I would possibly have the opportunity to have a sit down with you, she wanted me to ask you one question. The cadence of your voice, the way you speak, is it something you trained yourself to do, or were you born just speaking in that way, in that manner, that has become your trademark?
Of course, I wasn't born speaking that way, but I always trace diction to very interesting development when I was in primary school. There was a teacher who, when we were reading books, the series of books called Moses, written by a Ugandan lady, she was white, called Barbara Kimenye. And she would ask the class to read a paragraph or two. But after we had read one round, she then chose me and another young lady to be the only ones who would read. And it happened again in high school, in Form 1. A teacher whose name I still remember, called Mrs. Simwenyi. And we were reading Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. And she asked everybody to read a paragraph. And after the first round of reading, she said, your diction and a young boy called Gishinga Karaoke is very good. So you will be reading. And I think that gave me the opportunity that when I got it wrong, I would be corrected.
Yes.
And over the years, of course, once, as they say in English, practice makes perfect. That may be the genesis of what many of those who listen to me call a neutral accent. I hope that does answer your question.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
You know, we're here in your office, and I'm looking at some of those, the pictures of Africans. I'm seeing Mandela, Nkrumah, Nyerere, Lumumba. And I would even add to that wall, there should be Sankara, Anwar.
There should be
Anwar
Samora.
Sadat.
There should be Samora Machel.
Yes.
There should be Ahmed Sekou Touré. There should be Ahmed Ben Bella. These are representative rather than completeness.
Yes.
But these individuals are the anchors of Pan-Africanism. And I had the advantage of at least meeting two of them, Nelson Mandela and Julius Kambarage Nyerere. And of course, Patrice Emery Lumumba is fascinating. Died very young and in a very sad circumstances. But if you read his letter from prison to his wife, Josephine Opango, and you see the situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo, his ideas are evergreen. And you cannot but ask, had he not died at that time, would Congo be the same?
Yes.
Would Congo be so troubled as she is and as she has been since his death in 1961? So these individuals represent a great tradition. If I were to add a lady, I would also add Winnie Madikizela Mandela, whom I thought is misunderstood, but a great human being.
Do you want a world-class German education in Rwanda for your kids? Well, then take a listen. Ntare LouisenLund International School in Bugesera
delivers a top STEM curriculum from Germany that is designed for science, maths, and technology learners. With German language classes starting in grade 8, Ntare LouisenLund International School gives your child a direct path to top affordable universities in Europe. Graduates join an elite alumni network with access to global careers and internships. So why send them abroad? It's a waste of your hard-earned money. So visit www.ntarelouisenland.org to learn more. Scan the QR code that you see on the screen or click on the link in the description. So that group, those great Africans, unfortunately, all of them have passed away.
Correct.
I would like to ask, could you add President Paul Kagame among the list of those great Africans?
Definitely. And if you listen to me, I am one who speaks about President Paul Kagame very frequently in the African scene. And I say that President Paul Kagame, in very difficult circumstances, has managed to create an environment that has facilitated the conduct of societal affairs in a very disciplined way. If President Kagame were to listen to this podcast, he'll remember at one time when he was the chief guest at a meeting where I was a speaker in Nigeria in the presence of President Buhari. After I had spoken, somebody from the audience then raised the question and told me, "You support dictators." And I said, I can never support a dictator. What I support are disciplinarians.
Yeah.
And I think that explains the people who are quick to judge. In my view, President Kagame has done very well. The thing that great leaders like him must do in good time is now to think transition.
Yes.
Because transition is critical. And I want to believe that is work in progress. How do you then create an environment where there are young men and women who will then carry the agenda forward? And when I look at some of the cabinet appointments in the ICT sector, in the foreign affairs sector, I am of the view that that is being done. So President Paul Kagame, when historians judge him fairly, they will find that he has made a contribution. He has no shortage of detractors.
Yes.
But who said you must not have them? In any situation, you'd always have people who don't like what you are doing because you are doing it. But if you are fair, you would say that he has made a contribution in very difficult circumstances. If you look at some of the writings about Rwanda in 1994, the pessimists had written the obituary of Rwanda, never to rise again. That Rwanda has risen and is now in the pantheon of African countries that is referred or are referred to as successful is a credit to President Kagame and his comrades in arms.
Many African leaders praise Paul Kagame publicly.
Yes.
But few, in my opinion, emulate his governance style meaningfully. The discipline, the attention to detail, the fight against corruption. Why is that? Why do you think they are like that? Is it fear? Is it weakness? Is it political convenience?
It's a combination of all those. A combination of all those because environments also define how people behave. If you look at the administration of Paul Kagame post-genocide, it created what one may call a tabula rasa, a plain sheet from which to start again. Like the phoenix, Rwanda was emerging out of the flames. And in that way, he wrote the scripts together with his comrades in arms, and they have been largely faithful to the script. In many countries, you find that there is the historical baggage You have an electoral system which is informed by corruption and ethnic manipulation. And sooner rather than later, you find yourself drowned in a swamp. And that is what is happening in many African countries. So they know what is good. They can talk about the good thing, but bridging the gap between rhetoric and action is not for the faint-hearted. And that is the tragedy. I have myself said on a number of occasions that one of the greatest problems in Africa is the gulf between rhetoric and action. The day we are able to bridge that, that is when Africa will begin to realize our potential. We have reduced important things which ought to be implemented to mere slogans. And that, in my view, is unacceptable. Today, at a very practical level, you go to Rwanda and you want to incorporate a company. You can incorporate a company.
In 6 hours.
Absolutely. And that is when you are talking about Africa Agenda 2063 and you are talking about Africa Continental Free Trade Area. That is what you want to talk about. And I believe that if in the region, before I talk about the continent of Africa, if in the East African community region, we were to emulate some of the things that are happening in Kigali, then we would be moving in the right direction in a manner that would shock many. And that would then be the building blocks for continent-wide implementation of Africa Agenda 2063 and Africa Continental Free Trade Area.
It's exciting. It's interesting what you're saying. And one of the things that I've never understood is I believe in logic. 1 + 1 = 2. We know what we want. We know that it's good for us. Clean streets, security, climate resilient architecture.
Yes.
But why don't we, as African societies, as African leaders, just make that choice? Because it's very confusing. It's almost illogical.
Yes.
We'll go to Europe, we'll go to the North America, we'll go to China and enjoy the work and discipline that those societies have created for themselves. Then we'll come back home and say, you know what? Those are things for Bazungu.
There is a friend of mine who makes a statement that I repeat every so often, that culture eats strategy and tactics for breakfast. Culture.
Is our African culture wrong? Is it broken?
Our political, post-colonial political culture in many African countries allows disorder, because disorder and indiscipline are the breeding grounds for corruption. And to the extent that our politics remains corrupt, the desire for disorder as a fishing ground remains alive. There are so many people with vested interest in having a disorderly Africa that if they created order, the things that they want to do would not be done. If, for example, you are a politician whose desire is to engage in primitive accumulation of public wealth, you do not want a system that calls you to account. You want a culture of impunity where you do wrong and nothing happens to you. But if you are in an orderly system a la Rwanda, you are in an orderly system a la Botswana, you are in an orderly system a la Mauritius, a la Namibia, you will be punished for it. And we will put the mark of Cain, metaphorically speaking, on your forehead so that people know this is the thief. And that is why, therefore, we don't do things right. Because if you want your streets to be cleaned, you give it to somebody who has corrupted you, who has no capacity, who says in his bidding and procurement document that he has 100 trucks and he has none. The garbage will not be collected. If you give somebody the contract to supply water to government departments, to somebody who is a broker and does not produce water, bottled water, the water will not be supplied, but money will be paid. But if you go to countries, and Rwanda is an example that I want to give, where your president is a master of detail, he'll want to know who this individual is. Due diligence will be undertaken. And within a period, people begin to accept that order is good for everybody. But in many other countries, we normalize the absurd. So you have street lights and people don't care about the street lights. You have people walking around and throwing and littering the place. You have education systems which are underfunded. So one of the things that we must do is to develop a culture of discipline. Discipline is half the journey. And you who are from Rwanda will appreciate that. Sometimes it is inconvenient, but it is necessary convenience. You walk into an airport in Kigali, you see order. And people are orderly. You go to the streets and you look at how the roundabouts are maintained and you see order. I've been to Musanze, at the military college in Musanze and in the police training, order. And it gives you joy. If only it was easy to say and easy to do, that model would be replicated, of course, with sensitivity to local realities. At one time, I said, when I look at how the Ethiopian airline is run, I said, I wish African governments would run the way Ethiopian Airlines is run, because it has become the airline for Africa. I know Rwanda is also trying to move in that direction. And the answer is, if you are organized, and Africans can be organized, if you are disciplined and Africans are disciplined, it is indisciplined by the political class that we then use stereotypically to say that Africans are not disciplined. I look forward to the days when discipline will be the mantra.
Before we continue, if you live in Kigali, what do you do to stay strong and healthy? Do you want to get fit without breaking the bank? If you are like me and the answer is a resounding yes, join Waka Fitness, Kigali's top fitness hub, with expert-led workouts in a state-of-the-art facility, high-end equipment, and an unbeatable community vibe. And here's the best part. As a listener of this podcast, you get 20% off your membership. The thing is, this deal ends in August. So just hit the link in the description, www.waka.fitbase.rw/thelongform, or scan the QR code on your screen. Join Waka today. Get strong, feel good, and live life abundantly.
What is wrong with our African elites? Why? Because I understand the normal wananchi, the Waturaje. You know, they're just trying to navigate the political structures that they now find themselves in. But there's a story from an interesting, I'm not going to say the country, but it's within the region. And there was a certain minister who got extremely sick in his village. And this was a ruling party minister.
Yes.
So he goes to the local area hospital. He's having cardiac issues. He gets there, not a single painkiller. This is a minister. He was an MP from that area. He had access to not only power, but also means. But somehow his local area, his local village, the hospital that takes care of his mom, his cousins, his siblings, his friends, was ill-equipped to take care of him. He had to be flown to the capital city by military jet to save his life. And there's another story. Same country. I will not name the country. a big wig gets cancer, flies to Germany, gets treatment, comes back home, and decides to thank God for his cure by building a church, not a hospital.
Yes.
A church.
Yes.
What is wrong with us?
I know that country, but I also will not say it.
Let's leave it alone.
You know,
What is wrong with us?
let us say what is wrong with our political class and senior civil servants in most of Africa. There are exceptions to the rule. But the dominant rule is, number one, we labor at, we means these fellows in position of authority, they live in what I call the culture of scarcity. They think things are getting finished. Number two, they are selfish. And when you are selfish, you get into an arena of primitive accumulation. And they are not patriotic. And they have a very short-term view of things. And when you are not patriotic, it means you are selfish. It means you are myopic. So what do? You only care about yourself, because when you want to go to hospital, you have the capacity to fly or to be flown to some other country where people have worked hard. When you want to and paid their taxes, meanwhile you've stolen our taxes. When your child wants to go to school, you take them to a curriculum which is not your own. And when the roads are bad, you buy a four-wheeler. When the roads are congested, the roads are cleared for you. So that is informed by the belief by most people in African politics that the people owe them, so that joining politics is not for service. In 1984, I had the fortune of being an intern in the office of Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. And I was amazed at his simplicity. We were driving with him in his car in the streets of Dar es Salaam, and he was following rules. There was only one lead car and his car in the middle and another one at the back, but following the rules. Simplicity. Because he was agonizing over this very same thing, even at that time, that we have become so selfish that I take money from my people and then take it to another country, that I, as a leader, don't even have faith in my own country. Nyerere could not understand it. That I'm a minister in a country in Africa, I take the money, steal the money, and I go and keep it in Panama or in the Cayman's Island or in Dubai, until the day that we redefine leadership. And there is something in African culture. We lost something in African culture. If you look at the cultures in many African societies where you are talking about Banyarwanda, Baganda, Bagishu, Banyankore, you are talking about the Akan, the Igbo, you are talking about the Zulu, you are talking about the Chewa. There was something in our African cultures that if you stole from the community, you'd be punished. But with the advent of foreign law, we lost the good things of our culture. We only go to culture when it is convenient to do so. When we are wedding, then we say culture. But when we are stealing, we are not talking about culture. So until the day that we go back and reclaim, and one of the attributes that we must have when you want to serve, you must be capable of being ashamed. Many people in positions of authority in Africa, particularly at the political level and senior civil service level, are no longer ashamed.
They're shameless.
They are completely shameless. And on a daily basis, they do things that if they were to reflect upon, they would know that they have become subhuman in their behavior. But their conscience is numbed. Their conscience is seared. They have lost feeling. They are capable of stealing a whole cow and keeping it in the fridge while a child is dying there. This is who we have in most African countries in senior political offices and civil service. And that is why they can go around having stolen money in the millions, then they distribute it to massage their egos. They have killed systems so that systems don't work. They are the ones who have the yam and the knife, and they give you a little piece of the yam as long as you supplicate to them.
How much can we blame colonialism? It's been, for most African countries, plus 60 years since we were given quote unquote independence. How much of it is a remnant of the colonial state, and how much of it is us?
You know, colonialism is alive and well. We always talk about colonialism as if it was something that is in the past. It is alive. It is alive because the colonial boundaries that were imposed on us in Berlin in 1884 and 1885 are alive and well. Colonialism is alive and well because the laws that we inherited, whether it's Dutch, Roman, or common law, are alive and well. Colonialism is alive and well because the languages that were imposed on us by the colonialists are alive and well. Colonialism is alive because even the education systems are alive and well. And Nkrumah is the one who said it very well in 1963. He said that in our fight against classical colonialism, it may be easy to change our politics. It may even be easy to change our economies, but the mental impact of colonialism was so deeply ingrained, he said, not in so many words, that it could even now have become a part of our DNA. And the colonial system that was brought to us was meant to serve the master, not to serve us. And Nyerere repeated it by saying that even the education that we received from the colonialists was designed to make us hate ourselves and to run away from ourselves. That is how I therefore understand Ngugi wa Thiong'o when he says we must decolonize our minds. It is work in progress. Remember that the colonial project coupled with the slave trade was over centuries. On average, we've been independent for just 60 years with the neo-colonial project. So there must be a consciousness. This consciousness is something that has been talked about for a long time. The Pan-African movement, when it started, was about this consciousness. When the South African Pixley Kaisa Kaseme is speaking in Columbia in 1906, he's only 27 years of age, and he said, we must regenerate Africa. When in 1963, the 32 leaders are in Addis Ababa talking about a new Africa, they are saying the same thing. When in 1966, Leopold Sedar Senghor introduced the Festival of African Art, he is saying the same thing, we must change. When Thabo Mbeki in 1996 is talking about, I am an African, he's saying the same thing. When Paul Kagame is talking about we must have African solution to African problems, he's saying the same thing, which means that we are conscious that is an ongoing battle. The battle may not be easy to win, and I have lately given greater meaning to these words of Maya Angelou, that African-American who said, we must endure defeat, but we must never be defeated. In other words, we must realize that sometimes we make 5 steps forward and then we are pushed back 3, but the movement is there. So it is not going to be easy. There are few African countries which, in my view, have made greater effort than others. Nyerere to his credit, found a country with over 130 something ethnic groups, and through conscious effort within a period of no more than 24 years, he had welded that country by making Kiswahili the lingua franca. That is never talked about as often as it should be. That does not mean that there have been efforts to undermine that. Botswana is monoethnic, but it can't be argued that the administration that have been there have tried to do something that is positive. I would dare say that Namibia has also tried to do that. I would dare say that in the early days, even in Uganda, after the removal of Idi Amin in 1986, we saw a conscious movement towards that destination. There have been a few pushbacks, and they need to re-examine themselves. And I was very happy the other day when I saw President Museveni apologizing that certain mistakes have been made. Now, what I expect my good friend President Museveni to be doing now is to say, how do we make sure that the gains that we made after Idi Amin are now consolidated? And of course, Rwanda has been very useful in that regard. In Kenya, we made certain gains, but I now see us clawing them back.
Really?
I see us clawing them back. I was deeply involved in the Constitution Review exercise. I was the secretary of the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission. And we went around this country, and the people told us we hate corruption. The people told us we don't want our politics to be based on ethnic mobilization. As I speak to you now, we are mobilizing ethnically. As I speak to you now, political corruption is almost becoming a culture that is accepted. As I speak to you now, I hear politicians dividing the country into Nilots and Bantus.
That's dangerous.
Dangerous. Dangerous. So it is, I mean, when you are talking about a nation, it is always critical that you must remember that no matter what good you do, there'll always be people who want a pushback, because disorder, as I said a little earlier, is also very lucrative for certain individuals. But it must be told that these problems are not uniquely African. If you look at the history of Europe, they too went through this phase. If you look at Asia, Latin America, they went through this phase. But that does not legitimize what we are doing. If we have observed our neighbors making certain mistakes, our journey should be much shorter by avoiding the mistakes and the holes that they had to go through.
On Africa as a new hero, at least according to TikTok, WhatsApp groups, and Instagram. The name of that hero, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso. Do you see echoes of another great African, Thomas Sankara, in him, in his rhetoric and posture? Or, as some would say, many believe, he's simply a manifestation of Russian propaganda and disinformation, who's there to almost lull Africa's youth into a false sense of hope? What are your thoughts?
I think Captain Traoré is a symbol of something. The jury is still out as to his actual performance. And his rise to prominence as a symbol of change, as a symbol of resistance to a neo-colonial power, and the neo-colonial power is France in this regard, and by extension the conceptual West, must be seen at the level of symbolism. There is danger of simplicity, that we are being too simplistic, and therefore burdening even Traore himself and his administration with things that they cannot achieve. I've seen very many speeches which are artificially generated being attributed to Traore.
And projects and
And
buildings.
projected and things, even in certain cases in Niger, they even say they have made a plane, which of course you and me know are fiction. But to be positive about it, I believe that that environment and that mindset can be disciplined to be used in an effective way to mobilize people in a particular useful direction. And one of the things that I've said, I was about a year ago at a meeting which was convened by the foreign affairs ministers of the Sahel countries in Bamako. And at that meeting, the foreign ministers of Niger was there, the foreign minister of Mali, the foreign minister of Guinea, the foreign minister of Burkina Faso, and the foreign minister of Togo. And my message was, let us remember that as we move forward, we'll have no shortage of enemies. That as we move forward, we'll have to ensure that our agenda is understood and cascaded to the mass, to the majority of the people. As we move forward, let us not imprison ourselves in empty slogans. Let us learn from history that if you are an individual, you will be eliminated. And I recounted the number of people who were eliminated. I talked of Olympia in 1963. I talked of Amilcar Cabral. I talked of Lumumba. I talked of Thomas Sankara. And I said, what is my preferred approach? That we must have so many voices across the continent of Africa that even if you eliminate one or some, the movement goes forth. It must not be an individuated thing. We must not create a Moses who will be parting red seas for us and summoning pillars of fire to stand between us and the enemies. So what I would love, now that we have the advantage of TikTok, to remember that unless it is a movement, it will have the lifespan of a butterfly or a mosquito.
What does his emergence as an African icon tell you about our need, Africa's need, our youth's need for a hero, for a symbol, for hope?
Perhaps there is a deep desire in the minds and hearts of a good number of Africans to have African solutions to African problems, to have Africa defining her agenda and owning that agenda, to have systems that defy the colonially inherited system. That is what it is, and is also a message by the younger people that we do not want octogenarians to dominate the political space. We want to see younger people being given their pride of place, even if they are to be guided by older people. It is a message to those who have remained in politics for too long in the African continent that their time is to transit and to hold the hands of younger people. That is the message. But as I've already said, it is very important to ask the question, because it also calls into question governance. Remember that the Sahelian countries were ostracized by the economic community of West African states and also ostracized by the African Union on the ground that they rose to power unconstitutionally contrary to the Malabo Declaration. But people are saying, we don't care. We don't care because you people, in the name of the thing that you call democracy, you've managed to rig electoral processes so that we cannot get the men and women we want and we deserve into positions of leadership. I myself have said, when I was asked, I said that what you are calling coup d'etats are extraordinary change of power necessitated by a toxic environment or toxic environments that do not allow good people to emerge. My caution, and I hope this is my desire, that going forward, what is going to happen is that my people in that area Traore, Atimi Goita, and others are going to be midwives of a new dispensation. So that the 5 years that they have given themselves are going to be 5 years of redefining and rethinking governance, so that when they leave office, then they will have created an enabling environment that will allow leaders who are faithful to their countries to emerge. I pray and hope that they will not drop their military fatigues, wear suits, and then succeed themselves.
The crisis, let's now go from West Africa, let's go to Central Africa. The crisis in Eastern Congo is often treated as maybe a local or a regional issue. Yet for me, it speaks to everything that Africa still struggles with. Weak states, colonial borders, foreign extraction, and ethnic scapegoating. Why has the rest of Africa largely turned a blind eye to this very issue?
If you look at the spiritual books, starting even with books that are not anchored, or spirituality not anchored in books, African spirituality, the Bible, the Quran, the Hindu Gita, the Torah, it was always the case that you take care of your neighbor. Because what happens in your neighborhood, whether you like it or not, will somehow affect you. But for some reason, African leaders, particularly those who are dictators, always took the view that what is happening is in your neighborhood must not and should not be your concern. And you could see this if you talk about what is Congo, then became Zaire, then became the Democratic Republic of Congo, that at critical times, we did not give it the attention. In the early days, it was not the case. If you look at, for example, in the first crisis of Congo, Kwame Nkrumah was very involved, and Ghana. In terms, he even wrote a book, The Challenge of the Congo. You could see that even Lumumba himself went to Accra and sought assistance. You could see that there was general interest in ensuring the stability of Congo, with Nkrumah himself say that until the day that the Congo settles, Africa will never be at ease.
And he was right.
And he was right. Africa has never been at ease. I mean, we are talking about a country that is as large as the entire Western Europe, but with many nations within a state, over 300 nationalities trying to be wedded into a single state. It requires statesmanship. It requires somebody who understands, or a group of people who understand. And unfortunately, the leaders that Congo have had after Lumumba, whether it's Kasavubu or Mobutu, have failed spectacularly. Because they have been short-termists. There has never been, in my view, a deliberate desire to ensure that the country functions. Even the two Kabilas, who in my view had the goodwill, not only of the Congolese, but even the neighborhood, did not do. I mean, if you want to drive, if you can at all, from Goma to Kinshasa, you can't.
It's impossible.
One would have thought that one of the major things that ought to have been done during the two Kabilas is to go infrastructure. Instead, what was allowed is for Western extractors and thieves
And Chinese.
and Chinese lately to thrive, with the consequence that Eastern Congo is one of the busiest airspaces in the world. And the reason is, if there is disorder, if the center does not hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the country, to use T.S. Eliot's, then everybody extracts. And the Tshisekedi administration has failed spectacularly, because of lack of appreciation that there was work to be done. And the neighborhood has tried to do something. To their credit, let's say, although the efforts have not yielded much, but I have seen the efforts that were being undertaken by President João Lourenço, the effort that was being made through Kenya with the former President Uhuru Kenyatta and the African Union, but they have been too feeble. So what has happened with the Kinshasa administration is to be simplistic about it. To say it is Rwanda that is in the business of destabilizing Congo. It is Uganda that is in the business of destabilizing the Congo. The M23 are sponsored by Rwanda. The ADF is, that I think is escapist. The reality is that Congo, like all African countries, had arbitrary boundaries imposed on it, and for that reason, you find populations across the border with different nationalities, and it's not unique to that region. Masa is in Tanzania, the Nuer in South Sudan and Ethiopia, the Oromo in Kenya and Ethiopia. How then do you address it? You address it, in my view, by looking at the circumstances. I'm now involved in some WhatsApp group where somebody has said, we need to find a solution for Congo. And my argument is the African Union, perhaps even before we go to the African Union, the East African community ought to sit DRC down, but they don't want to be sat down. But SADC tried to sit them down. They don't want to be sat down.
The other day,
Yes.
there were East African forces.
Yes.
That were, so the East Africans sat down
Yes.
and said, let us bring a force that will separate the belligerents. The Congolese government kicked them out.
Yes. There is a saying in Kiswahili, sikio la kufa halisikii dawa, that when an ear is getting to a stage where it will become deaf, whatever medicine you apply, it will not respond to. And I dare say that until the Tshisekedi administration in Kinshasa realizes that you must, or they must, solve the problem, and that they need the neighborhood to solve the problem, they are not going anywhere. Remember that the DRC is a member of multiple regional bodies. It is a member of SADC. It is a member of East African Community. It is a member of Central African Community. It is also continentally a member of the African Union. The reality on the ground is that the Kinshasa administration does not have total and effective control of its territory. When you find yourself in such a situation, metaphorically speaking, you are in a hole. You stop digging. You then have rapprochement with your neighbors. You then have what in the days of the Soviet Union and the United States of America called détente. You talk to people that you may not like, and you sit down both with your people on the ground with the help of neighbors. You don't go into orgiastic chest thumping. You don't go back to the colonial masters. You don't look for neighbors or for enemies where the enemies are not. Until the day the Kinshasa administration admits that and is seen to be actively involved, then they are going nowhere. Because if you expel the East African force, you'll still meet them at the AU. At least you'll also meet one of them again at SADC. You'll meet another one of them again in Central Africa. So what are you running away from? From your shadow? And I'm happy that pressure is being brought to bear. Although I would have liked the Doha meeting to be held in Addis Ababa with African mediators, but when you are in trouble, any effort that solves the trouble is to be appreciated.
Is the M23 rebellion the disease, or is it the cure?
I believe that it depends on who you are talking to.
I'm talking to you.
And if you are talking to me, it is number one, a symptom, and it is a reaction to exclusion, a reaction to the fact that you are telling me my country is not my country, a reaction to the reality that you are telling me you will not listen to me. And I'm therefore saying, if you can't listen to me, I'll pinch you so hard so that it will be so painful that you listen to me. And that is exactly what the M23 is doing. They are pinching the mother so hard. And the mother now has no excuse but to say, my child, what can I do?
Hopefully the mother listens.
We hope so.
Because I'm worried that I was speaking to Charles, and I asked him almost a similar question, and I asked him, okay, what happens with this rebellion? And he was speaking about potential outcomes, and he gave me two. Either a new political dispensation where the Kinshasa loses a lot of its power through devolution, almost like the Kenyan model, where you have these federal states, or the country just breaks apart.
Let me add to Charles's view. If I was hired as an expert to advise the Kinshasa administration on how to deal with the problem in Congo, the first thing I would do is to call an all Congolese meeting with all rebels, all of them that claim to be rebels, even if they have only 10 soldiers, I would call them. And I would tell them that we must engage in scenario building for solutions. And this is what I would recommend: a confederation. A confederation that has a very loose center that only takes care of defense, takes care of foreign affairs, and takes care of what I call national coordination. I would rationalize the different regions and give them autonomy in areas of policing and in areas of policy formulation. And once I do that, I will unburden the center. How does it work? In Switzerland is a good model, a confederation rather than a federation. And once you do that, of course, it will have to be adapted to the circumstances and the unique circumstances of the Democratic Republic of Congo. That would be one of the things on the table: federation, confederation. Another one would be federation, which will be a la United States of America or a la Nigeria. And it would mean the center remains a little stronger than in a confederation, but the federal units would largely be responsible for their activities. But I would ensure that the proliferation of arms or the control of arms is at the center. Because, and I would warn everybody who is present, I would warn them, if we don't confederate and federate, then what is going to happen is that we are going to have a multiplicity of players, and the country will de facto be divided. So that even if the individual units are not recognized internationally, you'll say the Kinshasa administration is the only one which is recognized internationally, but they will not have control of over half of their country, and people will be doing their things to the detriment of the country, and they will be in a perpetual state of war. So the choice is clear, and that is what requires pragmatism, that is what requires statesmanship, and that is what requires painful decisions. I watch a movie which I commend to you. It is out of the Hindu epic, the Mahabharata. And one of the things in that epic is that there is a contestation between two cousins, with one seeking power. And one of the great thinkers there, Bhishma, says, in order to ensure that there is peace, I'm recommending that Hastinapur, which is their territory in medieval India, be divided into two. For the sake of peace, sometimes painful decisions must be made. Sometimes people who live together must separate before they become friends.
That sounds like a lot of common sense.
But you know the history of common sense.
There you go. It's not very common.
It's not very common, even when you call it common sense.
So what are the chances that with the administration as it stands today, with the leadership as it stands today, that such a common sense, logical outcome is brought to bear?
I never say never. And I pray and hope that the Tshisekedi administration has a Pauline moment, their metaphorical journey to Damascus, and he sees a light, and that light tells him that what is being proposed by many people who are interested in the security of the Democratic Republic of Congo makes practical sense. If he does not, then what is going to happen is that the forces which want to self-determine will become stronger and stronger, and the country will become more and more ungovernable.
I worry that because I'm already seeing people with names like Eric Prince of Blackwater. This is for those who don't know, you probably know, but he's a mercenary group,
Yes.
notorious for not just human rights abuses, but also being almost another arm of American power. I'm hearing them coming into the Congo. It almost sounds like what happened with Mobutu and his famous Belgian mercenaries.
Yes.
I worry about that state. I worry about the presidency. I worry that everything might make sense. But there are powers, as they say in the Bible, powers and principalities that just might be too powerful to allow for Congo to survive.
You know, my brother, your worry is also my fear. You know, when I saw the mercenaries who were surrendering in Goma, it tells you that somebody must have planted in the mind of the Kinshasa administration that this thing can be won militarily. And there is now no shortage of these quick outcome Blackwater kind of thing. There is another one that also operates, is it outside of South Africa? And they tell you that we are going to solve this problem. And they tell you, you don't have to pay us. You have enough mines.
We'll pay ourselves.
We'll pay ourselves. And then they acquire appetite for paying themselves. And they too, therefore, become part of your problem. What you thought was your solution becomes your problem. Unfortunately, the reality is that they are, as you put it very correctly with reference to the Bible, powers and principalities outside the Democratic Republic of Congo with their comprador allies who believe, even if they don't say it, that an unstable and disorderly Congo is necessary for their well-being.
It's good for business.
It's good for business. And unfortunately, and I pray I'm wrong, the Kinshasa administration may have been hoodwinked into believing that these are their allies. They are not their allies. And the sooner the scales drop from their eyes or are removed from their eyes, the safer they are.
It's crazy when you think about the Congo and their relationship with colonial powers. I mean, these are the guys who were cutting off the limbs of your ancestors. How then do you then become so beholden to them? It doesn't, they dress like them. You know, I would have thought that there would be a mass rejection of everything Belgian, French, but it would seem that they almost ignore that Patrice Lumumba was murdered by these people. That Mobutu was imposed on them for decades. And now, these are their best friends. If someone says that Africans are foolish and short-sighted and forgetful, would you call that person wrong?
I would not be as blatant as you are. But
You're,
I would
you're a politician.
I would say, and by saying this, and you've said something that is so very important, Leopold of the Belgians is reputed to have actually killed no less than 15 million, leave the Holocaust, 15 million people. You go to Brussels and other places, it's the wealth of Congo.
You see it.
And you see how they punished your nationalist leader, killed him, dissolved his body,
And give you
and
a
gave you
tooth.
his tooth. And yet I'm told there is a Congolese musician whose name I know, but I'll not name, who has even a portrait of King Belgians of the Congolese in one of his apartments. No sense of history. But it can be explained in the realm of psychology. I think it is called the Stockholm Syndrome, where the person who has been abducted is attracted to the abductor. And I think that is why when we talk about decolonizing the mind, that is why Patrice Emery Lumumba was saying he looks forward to the day when the Congolese will have liberated themselves mentally. Unfortunately, the Belgian style of administration was very deliberate. You picked a few elite, you impoverished everybody else, and ensured that the forces of the instruments of terror are in the hands of a few. And you sow confusion within their ranks, and then they become very easy to manipulate, very easy to control. That has been the fate of the Democratic Republic of Congo since 1960s, 50s to 60s. Remember, this was Leopold's personal property. In fact, the Berlin Conference was a product of the appetite of King Leopold, when the European powers now say, let us go to Berlin to divide this territory so that we may eat without conflict amongst ourselves. So it is sad. But yet, my brother, I hold the view. And immediately the current chair of the AUC took office, I wrote a very long letter to him, a copy of which I'll give you to keep. And I told him, I hear you when you talk about the year of reparation being the year 2025. I hear you when you talk Africa Agenda 2063. I hear you when you talk about Africa Continental Free Trade Area. But I want you to remember that until the day that we resolve conflicts in Africa, we are not going to achieve all these. I hold the view that the African Union has a primary duty to do what is necessary to make Congo work. If I was to be extreme about it, I would even say that in a country such as that, there may be merit in making it an AU mandated territory to be administered for at least 10 years to stabilize the country before you hold credible elections.
Let's now go south. Let's go to the nation that gave us Nelson Mandela and Winnie. What does President Donald Trump's bullying of South African President Cyril Ramaphosa in the White House, what does it signal to the rest of Africa? Is it a new law? I remember watching it. I was watching this. It was live. It was being streamed. And as an African, watching our richest country on the continent, the president of that country, the head of the ANC, African National Congress, being dragged like a houseboy, I felt embarrassed. I was in shock, close to tears, actually. I felt it was a new law. But was it a new law, really? Or was it just a public manifestation of a private American disdain to Africans?
I would be slow to call it American, because America is much larger than a serving president or a serving administration. But I felt the same pain that you felt. I've watched the footage several times. And I look at President Cyril Ramaphosa sitting there, being shown footage which is definitely taken out of context. And he's sitting there and he's being told that this is what legitimizes our argument that there is genocide.
White genocide.
White genocide. And that is being said at a time when the impact of apartheid, remember that the apartheid administration was declared by the world to be a crime against humanity. Its impact, it is still there. The land that was seized is still in the hands of these whites. White privilege is still evident in Africa. I would have loved, for example, President Ramaphosa to have responded to some of the things immediately. Number one, a footage that is being shown that had nothing to do with South Africa, and that was in the media for a long time. And Cyril is somebody who is very well read. He should have seen that and said, no, this is not from South Africa. I would have wanted Cyril to say that Kill the Boer has actually been litigated to the highest court in South Africa, and it was determined that that was a war cry, that was not a call to actual killing of anybody. I would have wanted him to say that.
Why didn't he say that?
But there is another thing that also I want to be positive about. Cyril was a trade unionist in COSATU for a very long time. And I asked myself, had I been Cyril, would I have sat through it? And I think I would have walked out of it. But he sat there so calm that the person who wanted to humiliate him, when history is written, will be the one who will be humiliated. So that is perhaps that is my attempt at trying to reduce the pain.
A silver lining of sorts.
That is my attempt at trying to reduce the pain. But did he go to the United States too soon? I think so.
I think so too.
I think he shouldn't have gone to the United States. I think that there should have been what I call a diplomatic build-up. Remember that his ambassador had been expelled. And remember that they almost a diplomatic downgrade of the relationship between South Africa and the United States of America. Those who are listening to us may say, oh, that is hindsight. You are analyzing after the event. Countries don't run that way. But presidents do have advisors. I think that there ought to have been a diplomatic build-up at the level of chambers of commerce in the private sector and at the levels of foreign ministers, and then you build it. And I thought myself that perhaps their first meeting ought to have been in a neutral ground rather than in DC, where the President of the United States rules the roost.
You said that you would have preferred if Cyril said something.
Yes.
At that moment. Why do you think he didn't?
You know, what I'm saying is perhaps also unfair, and reactions are idiosyncratic. And Cyril, this is how I try to understand it, is a seasoned trade unionist who has had the opportunity of being confronted. He was a trade unionist during the height of apartheid. And perhaps with that reaction, he assessed the situation and thought that wisdom was in silence.
So what you're actually saying is that if I'm to make sense of and give it a real context, that this was a man who had been in boardrooms with white capital,
yes,
being called
all manners of names.
Yeah, and he has built a
thick skin to this, and perhaps also he must have watched the Zelensky debacle and must have said, if I get into exchange, it will become as juvenile as it almost became with the Zelensky exchange. So there are a number of things. It is the kind of thing that I think ought to be taught. That footage ought to be used to teach in schools of diplomacy. Yes.
Just to take your lumps.
Yeah.
This is crazy. No, because I'd like to, let's now go slightly north. Sudan. I have never seen, other than maybe, not even Rwanda, because Rwanda, by the genocide of the Tutsi in 1994, it was still a very provincial village society. We destroyed the country, but there wasn't much of a country to destroy in terms of infrastructure. Congo as well. They're destroying their country, but Sudan was a power.
Yes.
Regional, money, regional power, economic power, factories, tourism. Khartoum is one of Africa's great cities.
Absolutely.
How did they allow themselves, as Sudanese, to destroy the very thing, their very livelihood? It almost seemed as if the Sudanese were fighting against invaders, the way they treated their own country. What do you think was going on in their heads?
If you permit me, I want to go a little bit further down in history.
Yes.
Before the coming into being of Sudan as we know it, the Anglo-Egyptian and then the Turkish and then the independence in 1956 and the creation, the closed district, which is now South Sudan, and then the coming in the Numeri administration, the Mahdist Numeri administration. I remember these words of John Garang de Mabior. John Garang de Mabior, said, "I do not want Sudan to be divided, but Khartoum must make unity attractive." Ultimately, of course, Sudan split into two and we now have South Sudan. And we've got to remember the ideology, the predominant ideology from Numeri through to Omar al-Bashir and to people like Hassan al-Turabi. The Islamization and Arabization of South Sudan. And of course, the superiority complex that was inculcated by the Arabs. And Arabs was not just a skin color. I've seen people darker than me saying they are Arabs. So if you look at the emergence, therefore, particularly of Omar al-Bashir, when Pan-Arabism, and I'm using the word Pan-Arabism very, very deliberately here, and the whole idea of trying to decimate other ethnic African communities, the Janjaweedism, the emergence of Janjaweedism, which is where people like Hemeti came from, the creation of the Rapid Response Force. In fact, the Rapid Response Force is a monster that was created by the Bashir administration. And when you go to that, you remember the emergence and the rise of the middle class that were in the streets and led to the appointment of Prime Minister Hamdok, who himself was seen as a refined Sudanese who was worked internationally. And then the seeds that had been planted so that when you see the new administration, Al-Burhan, who are now, Al-Burhan and Hemeti are buddies. These are fellows who know each other. So that you can actually reduce this conflict into a conflict of egos. And a whole country is being sacrificed at the altar of egos. If you sat each one of them down, I dare say, and ask them, why are you fighting? Perhaps they would not tell you why they are fighting.
If they want power.
power for its own sake. You are right in saying that. And then overpower, then certain interests then begin to come in. Minerals begin to come in, not as the reason, but as the thing that you now also need to sustain the war. Then you now have other neighbors with other invested interests coming in. So to summarize my answer, the war in Sudan has now become a war where there are individuals who, in my view, have no cause. And if you ask them, I've seen Hemeti has now said that he's not even going to participate in any peace agreement. We are going to fight. So it is a war of dominance. It's a war of I fight to the death, I fight to dominate. And unfortunately, when a war has no clear agenda, it has only one end result. It will consume everybody and create a society that will take generations to revive. You can see it when you have these wars and these engagements. Haiti is a perfect example after the Duvaliers. You then create gangs, and gangsterism and disorder becomes a natural way of doing things. And I fear that Sudan is getting into that direction. So that even the other ideologies that we analysts may talk about, Arabism, you are going to deal with the places such as the Janjaweeds dealing with Darfurians. You now have a situation where if you asked, and there is evidence to this in this regard, if you ask the Hemeti group, RSF, they now have soldiers drawn from places, Chad, Niger. They have gotten young boys who are essentially mercenaries, who are fighting simply to earn a living. How do you deal with such a war? How do you demobilize them when you conclude the war?
And now you also have weapons like drones.
Absolutely.
Which are cheap.
Yeah.
And are now flooding.
Yeah. See what they did to Port Sudan. Using drones, hitting pipelines that are carrying oil from South Sudan to Port Sudan. So it is a war whose direction nobody knows. I know there have been attempts by IGAD, attempts by the African Union, attempts as is now becoming de rigueur by Saudi Arabia and Qatar. But once again, that to me is one of the most dangerous wars in this continent. And it's at the very heart of the continent. So very dangerous, very painful to see.
No, it's scary because Rwanda is, President Kagame has welcomed thousands of Sudanese. Students are now studying in the national universities because the universities were destroyed.
Destroyed.
And what happens? Are Sudanese going to now become eternal refugees in our region?
You know, unfortunately, in the short to medium term, we've got to deal with that reality because rebuilding that nation is going to take a long time. It is easy to destroy, but experience demonstrate to us. You only have to look at Somalia, you only have to look at Afghanistan,
Libya,
and Libya to tell you that it is not easy to rebuild. And remember, the proliferation of arms in people's hands now is not going. And once you put together forces that are actually mercenary forces, you can't demobilize them.
No, you can't put the genie back in that bottle.
Absolutely. The analogy of the genie is perfect in itself. I mean, how do you put the genie out back into the bottle? You can't.
So what happens as Africans? What do we do? How do you support?
I hold this view once again, that the African Union ought to be very serious.
It cannot even pay for it. Countries cannot pay their own dues.
You know, I was imagining to myself that on Saturday I was walking alone in the morning and I was thinking about Africa. I was thinking about East African community which can't pay salaries, thinking about Africa which is being funded. I heard Mo Ibrahim himself, who is a South Sudanese, talking about Africa not funding its affairs. And I said, if we had a crusading head of the African Union Commission, If Africans were to be anchored by the bigger countries, and when I talk about the bigger countries,
Who are the bigger countries?
Nigeria would come in this regard.
It's also a basket case.
I know, but there was a time, my brother, when Nigeria actually showed leadership during the ECOMOG, you remember, during the Liberian. Yes,
Obasanjo.
under Olusegun Obasanjo. If South Africa could show leadership, and there are people, sometimes you don't have to be big to show leadership. You just only have to have a big heart. It is possible to raise money within the continent and in the diaspora and to resolve the following conflicts. Sudan is the most active conflict that must be resolved. The Democratic Republic of Congo ought to be
I think it's the most systemic problem.
Yes. If that were to be resolved, then you can go to Libya, which has descended into chaos. Then you go to Southern Cameroons and also deal with that problem. Then you can deal with the insurgency in the Sahel. Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda, and all these, Al-Shabaab in Ethiopia. And believe me, when and if there is a will, it can be done. Look at, for example, Rwanda's decision to send troops to northern Mozambique. Rwanda is not a big country. It's not a $1 trillion.
But now it's being hammered for doing that.
Yeah, you'll always be hammered. That should
So you're
never
being
worry.
hammered by the Africans.
Yes.
Because that's the problem.
Yeah.
If you do it,
yes,
you'll be hammered by the Africans.
Yes.
Because they're suspicious.
Yes.
Then you're also hammered by some of the Mozambicans who are saying, hey,
why
are you here?
Yeah.
Then you're hammered by the international community.
Yeah.
Because then they're saying, how is an African country projecting militarily? That's our job.
Yes. That is our job.
Yes.
Indeed.
So then why would you go? It's a fool's errand.
I know you can characterize it as such, but the reason why we have those errands is because we are not united as a continent. If we were united as a continent, then you could deploy Rwandese forces, you could deploy Burundian forces, Ugandan forces, but under the auspices of the African Union. So that we are saying this is a continental exercise in which our kith and kin are lending their boots on the ground. Once again, not easy. And this idea that things must be easy before they are done is also misguided. It is in these complexities that we must be able to find solutions. And that is why I never give up. I believe...
How do you remain so hopeful?
You must be hopeful.
I'm maybe half your age.
Yeah.
I'm cynical.
Cynicism is okay, but you must never allow cynicism to drown you, to drown your enthusiasm. You must never allow it, because ask yourself, what is the alternative? The alternative is that today, even the countries that we thought were places of refuge, particularly the middle class, that you take your children to the United States of America, Europe, those windows are closing. So that the next thing that is going to happen, I'm going to bring my children to Rwanda. I'm going to bring my children to Nairobi or to Kampala. In fact,
it's happening.
I have young people from some of my mentees. One of them is from Gambia. He has chosen to study in Rwanda. Those are the things that I want.
I actually had him on the podcast.
Usman Ture.
Yes. Brilliant boy.
Yeah, brilliant boy. These are the things that I want to happen. So you who is using this medium, you are making a contribution. Don't ever underrate the work that you are doing, because it is information out there. Through this podcast that you are energizing people who had doubt, people who had given up. They could get just one sentence that says, let me do something about it.
Let us fight.
Yes. I was involved in an initiative not so long ago where we were trying to put together some dry food to be taken to refugees in Chad. Would it solve the problem? No. But somehow it is symbolic.
Something has to be done.
Something has to be done. So that is the attitude from which I come, and that is the tradition from which I think we must all come moving forward. Otherwise, our continent will remain one that is only fit for domination.
Now, last questions. There are two crises in the world that have swallowed all the media attention. There's Gaza and what's happening in vis-a-vis the Israeli response. Some saying that it falls within the wordplay of genocide. Then you have Ukraine, Russia. I see, as an African, sometimes I see that in my newsfeed, but I don't always feel, I don't see myself in those conflicts. As an African, I say, we have enough conflicts back at home. I can barely digest what's happening here. Why should we? Very often, I feel that international media and the way the global system works, they make us feel white pain more than black pain.
Yes.
And I'm fighting against that ideology in my head.
Yes.
That before I care about the Ukrainians,
Yes.
I should first care about the Banyamulenge. Before I care about the Palestinians, I should care about the Sudanese, because those are people who look like me.
Yes.
That if I was to meet them in the street somewhere, people who look like me, I might feel safe with them. I don't think that if I was to meet a Ukrainian or an Israeli or a Palestinian in some of these other capitals, I would feel as safe. Not saying that they're dangerous. I'm just saying as safe.
You're correct.
So why should we fundamentally care about conflicts in those faraway capitals, those faraway countries, when at some level I don't think they care about us?
There is, your question is deep and philosophical at once, but also practical. During the apartheid regime, Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe was asked whether he was anti-white, and this is what he said: there is only one race, the human race. But we, within that reality, must teach ourselves to love ourselves. But the reality is that within this human race, there is a race that thinks that it is superior to all other races and they are only fit for subjugation. I can't agree with you more that we ought to be concerned about conflicts in the continent of Africa because their impact is immediate. A conflict in Uganda will bring refugees to Kenya. Conflict in Sudan brings refugees to the entire region. So we have every reason. But look even at our own media houses. They don't report about this thing. They'll tell you they don't have the capacity. If you look at the media houses in the region, even if they do, you'll find there is Reuters, that is AFP or Xinhua that has collected the news so that there is not an African perspective about it. So we Africans must also tell our story. We must create media houses that have the capacity to do so. You as individuals who are now getting into this space, you are much better than many African media houses combined, because you are giving news which is unmediated, undoctored. And in our minds, therefore, particularly the minds of the middle class who watch television, we think the Gaza war is much more important than what is happening in Sudan. And in any way, the Sudanese are dying in larger numbers. We don't care what is, if you ask people if there are conflict in Mozambique, they don't know. If there are conflict in South Sudan, they don't know. But on a daily basis, you watch Al Jazeera. It occupies 30 minutes and repeated over and again. France, so CGTN, all these. So that when there is the death of an Israeli, is big deal. And Ukraine, it is big deal. I almost know how many drones were sent to Kyiv or how many drones Kyiv sent to Russia. Once again, we must tell our story. We don't tell our story sufficiently, and even the thing that is now called international order, what is it? Israel has ignored every decision of the ICJ, has ignored every resolution. So when I see now that the DRC and I think Benin have now become members of the Security Council again, of what value? In a nutshell, I think Africa labors under our weakness. We are weak. Politically, we are weak. Economically, we are weak. And because we are weak, our voices are weak. And because our voices are weak, we can be ignored. And because we are ignored, we are also ignoring ourselves. And that is tragic. Can we do something about it? Yes, we can and must. One of the things that I look forward to in the next 5 to 10 years is greater impetus in having a single voice from Africa, starting as it must with the regional blocs. If East African community could begin to have these voices coming out a lot more, and I was happy in the early days when efforts were being made to be sensitive to what is happening in Congo, and East African leaders were coming in very quickly. South Sudan, or rather the South Sudan situation, when you went to SADC, there was an immediate reaction from SADC, although very weak. In West Africa, there was an immediate reaction. They reacted to the coups in the Sahel, but not to the genocide that is taking place in Ambazonia in South Cameroon. Once again, all these are happening because who pays for them? You would be shocked that even some of these peace initiatives, you'll find some European NGOs as the ones who are funding the meetings
And
paying hotel bills for African ministers.
And he who pays the piper
Calls the tune. That is the cliche and the saying at once. So in a nutshell, until the day that the continent of Africa puts its act together, we are going nowhere. And it is this man, Kwame Nkrumah, in 1963 when he was speaking, he was in a sense of hurry. People said, oh, he just wanted to be the president of Africa. What if he wanted to be? But what did he say? We must live here with one army. We must talk about a single currency. We must speak with one voice diplomatically. We must be one, because he could foresee. And when he writes his book, Neo-Colonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism, and he there said, the most dangerous, we are living in those times. Times when you can see the neo-colonizers are desperate.
They need resources
They
and
need
people.
resources and people, to use the slang that is now in the lingua franca of the young people. People are woke. You can see France, for example. I'm told that the meeting of the Francophonie could possibly be held even in Nairobi in 2026. You can see they are now beginning to get into countries that were not formally colonized by them. You can see that even when their noses have been blooded, they still want to get into rapprochements, wearing velvet glove and to cover their fists of iron. There is desperation, which should send a message to Africans that this is the time to unite. And it is not just the traditional colonizers that are in the continent.
No.
China is here now.
Turkey
is here. Russia
UAE.
is here. The UAE is here. In other words, there is a new scramble for Africa. Everybody knows except us. And if we know, we are not bothered. Once again, in our accommodating style, we are allowing the camel to enter through the head. Before we know it, it will have occupied the whole tent.
It's happened before.
It's happened before, and if we are not careful, it will happen again.
So 2 outcomes: a united Africa, or
a united Africa will immunize us from the diabolical machinations of others. A disunited Africa will be eaten for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
And a side of dessert.
Yes, indeed.
Professor, thank you so much
God
for joining
bless
me
you.
on the long form.
Thank you.
This was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
A masterclass as usual.
Thank you.
when you come to Kigali, please.
I'll seek you out.
And
you
have a
must
cup
come.
of tea.
You must come to Kenya more often. One of the things that we must encourage young Africans is to travel across the continent. Of course, I know it is difficult. You can't use road. The airfares are very expensive. We have no rails except the one that are hauling goods. Those are the problems that need to be resolved.
Yes.
Yes.
And that's a wrap for this week's episode. Thank you so much for sticking with us until the very end. I'd actually love to hear your thoughts on today's conversation.